Hi, I'm Cheyenne Dirksen-Schroeder, Managing Editor of the Hutchinson News, and today we are interviewing City Council candidates. First of all, could you tell me your name, what race you're running in, a little bit about yourself?
Okay. Steve Dechant is my name. I'm running for the position from the Southeast District. I've been on City Council for 4 years, so I'm running for re-election. I'm 68. I'm married to my high school sweetheart, Mary Kay. We have 3 children and 5 grandchildren. We've lived in Hutchinson in 2 different occasions for a total of 34 years, and have lived all of those 34 years in the Southeast District in a couple of different houses in the times that we've lived here. I'm not sure how far you're wanting to go at this point in time.
Sure. In some of our previous conversations, the news has done a questionnaire where you've answered questions, as well as there have been a handful of forums. And in each of those locations you mentioned housing was very near and dear to your heart. Tell me a little bit about where Hutchinson stands on housing right now, and what needs to change specifically.
The housing problem has been one that's developed over literally decades, so it's not something that happened yesterday or even last year or 10 years ago. It's been developing for 30, 40, 50 years. There have been several housing studies done over the last 15 years. And the unfortunate thing is that although, and those housing studies have each identified that there's a significant percentage of deteriorating and dilapidated housing, especially in the south part of town, notably south of 11th. So that includes my district in total almost. Those housing studies, or the subsequent, the second and third housing studies, and one that the city has done, found that although there has been a significant amount of work done, notably through monies invested by the city and organizations like Interfaith Housing and New Beginnings, we've really not made any progress. So the speed of dilapidation or deterioration is keeping up with the work that we're doing, and in some cases exceeding it. I find that disheartening, yet at the same time we have done a lot of work, and there's even more effort coming and being placed towards that. I think notably, and something that I've known for in my time on City Council, is the rental inspection program that was instituted. It happened to have been instituted on Election Day 4 years ago in 2015. We had made some modification to it about 9 months later because of action by the legislature, which really seriously hindered that. Rentals aren't the only properties or houses that are needing to be attended to. But in the south part of town, and in the Southeast District particularly, there's a high percentage of rental properties. And of those rental properties, or I should say, and the rental properties that make up the greatest percentage of the deteriorating and dilapidated houses. So it makes sense to me that the attention and focus would be placed on the area that would have the biggest payback, so to speak, in terms of improvement. And that's where the attention and focus stays to this day, because that hasn't changed. There's still a high percentage of rentals, and of the deteriorated housing, the rentals make up the biggest part of that. Now, there needs to be work as well in regards to homeowner-occupied housing, and that's where the city has, in terms of its monies, has devoted primarily. Brush Up Hutch has been around now for several years, is quite successful, and helps homeowners out. And now, beginning in 2020, it's also something that's, I think it began this year already with applications being made, available on a limited basis to landlords to be used. But the Brush Up Hutch program, the down payment match program that's been in effect now for about three or so years, where a homeowner or prospective homeowner can basically make the down payment only by paying half of it, because the city would match, I think it's up to $3,000, the other half. Then there's also the zero interest home improvement loan. that is available for homeowners. These have been set primarily for some of the feature neighborhoods, Houston Whiteside, Creekside, Southwest Bricktown, College Grove. I believe there's some look at broadening that in a broader basis. But again, so there's been those kind of efforts, as well as certainly the salary monies to having a housing director on staff, and the other staff that support that. And of course, although not a residential thing, but certainly our downtown is important. And we've had a downtown director for a number of years. Now, his duties have been broadened more recently. He's not devoting his time solely or only to downtown, but we've all seen the tremendous improvement that's occurred there.
Was that downtown shift a smart move thus far? It was a fairly recent decision to kind of change his position. Tell me a little bit more about that. How is that working out?
It's really too early to tell because that shift came at the same time that our prior director of housing left city employment for another job, and so Jim Seitnetter, who's the person who's been the housing director, moved into that as an interim, on an interim basis. So he had the responsibility of directing the planning department while continuing what he needed to continue for housing. It's only been the last, what is it now, about 4 months or so that a new housing director, planning director was hired, and Jim is moving into his new role. So it's really too soon to tell. Sure. I know that there are concerns by some who are heavily involved with downtown, in the downtown area as business owners, maybe loft dwellers, that kind of thing. But I think that it was time. There's certainly nothing that can't be reversed or changed in the future. But I think it was time. We've had a housing director, put a lot of time directly through him, and a lot of money directly, tax dollar money, to the downtown, and it has paid off. It's paid off well. I think that this provided an opportunity for others to step forward and step up, because it's not something that, in my opinion, that we can forever subsidize highly, whether that subsidy is direct dollars to what's happening or the cost of personnel, which is generally more expensive than the subsidies directly to improvement that might be in the budget. So your question was, how's it working out? I think it's too soon to tell.
Sure.
And I've talked about why I think it was a good idea, and that at the same time we can certainly look at things after about a year or so and make a decision whether or not that it's going well yet.
Right. Coming back to housing, is it the city's job to intercede, I guess might be one way of saying it, rather than rely on other organizations, charitable groups, that kind of thing, to step in and improve quality of housing where the city uses tax dollars for another service, or is it more important that the city participate?
I think it's more important that the city participate. You use the word intercede. I think it's a group effort when we talk about interceding. I mentioned interfaith housing, I mentioned New Beginnings. There's certainly other volunteer groups and efforts that have been brought to bear. As a city, we are responsible. We need to be responsible. We need to be concerned about a broad basis of things. Obviously, streets and other infrastructure, public safety with police and fire are biggies, and they're certainly the element that is very visible and also very expensive. But if we don't have a basic housing stock, that's where our property tax base is, along with a number of businesses. But also gets to, we have to be concerned about our citizens. And when the market, when whatever nonprofits exist out there either doesn't do it right or doesn't have the capability of solving or resolving what's occurring, if we don't, our city's going to deteriorate along with it. And I've used this a couple of times in the forums that you refer to. there's the saying about a high tide raises all boats. Well, a low tide lets them all lower too. And housing affects all of us. And so if our housing is deteriorating, we're having an impact not just on that house, that neighborhood, that part of town, but we're affecting the entire city. And so the reverse of putting efforts towards that is going to affect as well.
I'm going to shift topics a little bit.
Okay.
Tell me about an aspect of you or your story that isn't typical of a public servant but will assist you on the city council.
Well, there aren't too many people who have made a career in the field of corrections that have served on city council. I'm not sure there have been any others. There are several things that come to mind. I mentioned that one, my rural upbringing. I was born and raised in a farm. My Catholic background, my values there. I think direct, guide, and give me focus. I mentioned the corrections just because it was a significant part of my life. I spent 33 years as a career. And although I think the view from the outside is of the tough, brutal, maybe, corrections worker, corrections is a people business. We the employees are people, the inmates are people, and so the bigger and the more effective part of working in that environment, working in that environment, is working with people. Now, these people happen to be incarcerated, but they're still people, and so it's very much that kind of a social in terms of, and so I bring that. My background and my education was in sociology and psychology, and I wanted to work in social services. As to my rural upbringing, I think it's a matter of people helping people to survive, to make things work in a rural environment, and neighbors helping neighbors. So I went to a small country school, and everybody knows everybody. And certainly my Catholic faith has guided me as to my values and having a concern for people. And that's, I'll jump a little bit to say that I've got a lifelong history as an adult of being involved and giving to my community. And so for me, city council, it's not the only reason or the only part, but for me, city council is a continuation of serving community. And so that's been part and parcel of who I've been as an adult all my adult life.
Sure. And you've been on the council for a little while. Why stay?
Why stay? Well, I partly just answered that. A continuation of service. I've thought about at such time as my time on council ends, whether that's in less than a year or 4 or 5 years from now, what I want to do next, what I'd like to get involved in terms of again, service. I also care about Hutchinson, and I care about the people, and of course I've spoken about people. And specifically I care about my Southeast District, my neighbors and the residents of the Southeast District. I want to be a part of making things better, or keeping things that are going well. And certainly by being involved in the city government, I can continue that service, that care and concern and spirit of caring for people or caring about people, and working to keep going well what is going well and to improve what can be improved.
What is going well, or give me some specifics?
Although taxes are often criticized, I think that this particular council has worked hard to keep increase to a minimum. I didn't look back. We had a 1/3 of a mil increase for 2020. I happened to vote against that, but we did as a council do that. Over the previous 3 years, I think we may have increased a mil or a mil and a half at the most. Pretty insignificant when we've got a total of about 60-some mils. I think that we've got some fantastic staff. Our city manager, who's retiring, is one of the outstanding managers in the state. Through him, there's been some excellent hires over the last couple of years with our fire chief and our police chief. We've seen very good improvement in fire service and police service. We've made some unpopular decisions, including increasing the sanitary sewer and storm sewer rates, which go into our water. And yet those are going to set us in a position to be able to deal with the very expensive infrastructure maintenance of sanitary sewers and storm sewers. We had a study done and specifically on our sanitary sewers. It's projected it would take us 30 to 50 years to complete it at a cost of about $30 million. $30 million doesn't just come along. Our water or our sanitary storm sewer rates, I should say, are netting us about $1 million a month. Excuse me, mistake. $1 million a year, above and beyond the normal maintenance costs. We've got a project we're going to undertake along Cow Creek. That's a $12 million project itself. So we haven't built up that $12 million yet, but we will have the revenue coming in to pay the bond to do that. Likewise, our roads, even though I know we get lots of criticism for potholes and those kind of things, our Main Street project has been an excellent project, and that wasn't just what one can see on the road surface top, but what goes on beneath the ground. We've got road projects going on every year throughout town during the road season, which is basically late April into May through about right now. Matter of fact, it's getting almost too cold for the asphalt plants to operate right now, so it shuts down. I think I'll stop with that as far as what's going well.
Budget-wise, are we matching stride with similar-sized communities, or are there certain departments that are underfunded, overfunded?
That would be a better question of the department director.
Sure, I know that's kind of
the department directors almost always want more money than what we allot. I think, well, I've talked about, as I see city government needs to be an efficient and effective provision of services to the citizens in terms of safety. Well, four things: infrastructure and safety, quality of life, housing, and the business environment and jobs. I look at that as a four-legged table or a four-legged chair. Take one away and it's not going to stand, at least not for long. And those, although there's a big difference in the money needed for, say, streets versus quality of life things such as events, Thursdays, parks, trails, those kind of things, they're both important. And in my mind, they're both equally important, not necessarily equal money, but equal attention and due consideration. So, would we like to have more money? Sure. Overland Park, you know, Johnson County, I think is probably the wealthiest county in the state. So they have, compared to us, you know, a bucket load of money that we don't have. And yet they have the same kind of issues. It's just that, you know, their money base is up here, ours is down here, but we're both struggling to make ends meet, do the things that we need and want to do in the city. So I think that we've been diligent and prudent in terms of our allocation of funds that we have available. It'd be great if we had some sort of a windfall. Well, as a matter of fact, we will. It won't be a windfall, but I think it's for calendar year 2022, the tax breaks that Siemens has enjoyed for the last 10, 12 years, that was part of enticing them to come, will be coming into play. We'll start receiving that tax revenue. That will be fairly significant. The council will need to not get spend happy because all of a sudden there's a couple $100,000 more to deal with, but to carefully scrutinize and allot that money.
When faced with cutting vital services or raising taxes, how do you respond?
Again, it's a balance.
Yep.
Now, there's a point, you use the term vital, and then we'd have to talk about what's vital.
Sure, I'm trying to push you between a rock and a hard place.
Quality of life types of things, like parks, trails, events, support of the arts and culture, etc., are not vital. Vital happens to come from a root that talks about life, so they don't keep people alive. But for a city to stay alive, they are vital. It's easy to talk about public safety. It's easy to talk about water, sewer and stormwater removal, streets. But I mentioned those 4 things of infrastructure, public safety, housing, quality of life, and business environment, job development. They're all vital, in my opinion. So when it comes to the point, and we've dealt with that in a significant way the last couple of years. We cut almost 12 positions for this current fiscal year that we're in, 2019. We did some other cutting. We didn't cut positions for 2020, but we certainly shaved budgets. And I already mentioned that there was a 1/3 of a mil increase. It can be easy to move to increasing the budget. We've got that capability. My basic philosophy is, as a person who lives, our household has a finite amount of money, and we either make it on that or there are problems. Now, that's easier said than done, both in a family as well as for a city, but that's where I start with. And if it truly came down to we had to cut, let's say, police officer or fireman positions, then we'd have to raise the taxes to afford those things. Our budget that is supported by property tax, sales tax, and other franchise and other taxes, a good 2/3 or more of that is salaries. That means that 1/3 of our budget is where we can really cut significantly and not be impacting direct services to our city, to our citizens. I already mentioned that we cut 10 to 12 positions for this year. Now, some of those were through normal attrition, some of some shifting around. But what happens in this city is due to personnel, to the employees that we have. I'll go back to where I started. It's a balance, and we tighten as much as we can, but sometimes push comes to shove, there has to be an increase in the revenue, and that means a tax increase.
Sure. Okay, at some of the council forums, we talked a little bit about building codes, downtown building codes, that kind of thing. Some business owners are mentioning them as being too restrictive, and others, noting the need for safety, that kind of thing. Tell me a little bit about that, or how the council is approaching the issue of codes.
Well, it was just last year, 2018, we did several things. There was a major overhaul of our sign codes. There was also a major overhaul of codes having impact with landscaping and parking. Both of those directly affect commercial businesses. We also had a significant change in a residential code and added something called R6 that applies, again, basically, now this went a little further north, 17th Street South, recognizing the smaller lots and allowing homeowners to build closer to their property line, have more of their lot covered by dwelling and or accessory buildings. But back to your question, downtown and codes. I mentioned a couple of things that happened last year directly in regards to that. We also had a work group taking a look specifically at codes. And that group struggled with when it comes to safety, and that's where the expensive elements, sprinkler systems, for example, 3-hour separation, firewalls, fire doors, those kind of things come into play. And I don't think that there's any room in regards to that. Because first there's life safety, and secondly there's property protection. And in the downtown situation, more so than any place else, where building abuts building abuts building abuts building, you want to be very concerned about protection of the property, because what might happen in one property may, and it's happened in other towns, wipe out an entire block or whatever kind of thing. The struggle, not struggle, where I come to pushing back on the code comments is that the comments are something like, we have problems with our codes, they are too restrictive, we can't do what we need to do. Okay, what codes? Identify the codes, and then we can start looking at what can or can't be done with those. I don't believe that there is this tremendous code problem. Is there tweaking that can be done? I think so. A good example, small one, it was sort of the poster child of problem things, was the requirement for water fountains, regardless of the size of business, etc. And I certainly don't know every code that's out there, and there's bound to be some others, but that's what I need to be able to deal with this, is what codes. And I bristle at the codes are over restrictive, they're causing problems, we can't work with them. Let's identify the codes, and then we can sit down and talk about those things. Talk with the professionals in those areas, whether it's fire, whether it's building, whether it's structural, whether it's electrical, whether it's plumbing, and work through what we might be able to change.
Sure. Those are my main questions. Is there another topic we haven't covered that you'd like to tell me more about, or?
I want to talk about some of the concepts in our comprehensive street plans, some of the concepts in our parks and rec study that was just completed within the last several months, and the Strong Towns conversation that we had about a year ago and has been ongoing. I'll be looking at considering how we can get a better balance. I've talked about balance in operation of the city, and this would be another part of that balance, in my opinion. The last thing I wanted to mention is I feel fortunate. I live less than 5 blocks, and I live at 5 blocks from downtown. My wife and I will walk down to the Fox Theater, or we'll walk down to Third Thursday, or we'll walk down to something else. I get to walk through my neighborhood, hopefully see some folks, and it's a more comfortable and neighborly and community bringing together way of living, if you can do a little more walking and that kind of thing.
Sure. And well, you mentioned Strong Towns as well, and I find it interesting that you tie streets to building community. Most times people don't associate those two topics. So that sense of building community, and I know Strong Towns, that was a sort of
significant element.
Right. So with the city council's role in building community, why is it important to make neighbors talk to each other, rather than focusing on other efforts?
We're a social being, and if we don't feed that part of us, we'll just continue to grow in our disconnectedness, which means that we will have less empathy, less care or concern about others. We don't exist in a vacuum. There are only a very few people that you can probably count on a hand or two that are totally self-sufficient, and they've got to be out in the middle of nowhere, literally. So the stronger connection that we have, the stronger community we will have, because we will care, we will help, we will look out for. It's the mowing the little old lady's lawn down the street, and taking a meal to somebody when there's been a death or some other event, or just being neighborly and inviting people in. It's what we as human beings are. And so the automobile has not helped that, other than our getting to travel across the country to see our relatives once in a while. But certainly when it comes to our neighborhoods and our next door neighbor, our neighborhoods, the more we can do to promote connectedness, the better off we are.
Those are my questions. Thank you so much for speaking with me. I
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it.
Thank you.